So anybody on the climate narrative side could flag this particular chart here of just 400 years of sunspot observations based on a forecast going into the future from NASA and the European Space Agency both. That's the red line going there. That's two space agencies saying we're going to drop off a cliff on the solar activity. And by the way, it's probably going to affect crop production. And you see why the world's getting turned upside down right now. We're in that exact same timeline year for year. And the agricultural disruption is now affecting our society. And they want to control what you can say about it or the cause and effect. Because you're going to be angry when you realize they knew this 20 years ago. You could have gotten ready, but they left you unprepared. And me too. And welcome back for the second half of Mini Ice Age Conversations. David Dubine here, Brighteon TV, uncensored, every other Friday, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just before the break, I was on the slide here. I didn't have a chance to really go through the graphic on it, but this is a really important chart to look at in terms of how we've seen our civilization ebb and flow. You know, we go through these great, vast civilizations that controlled the planet, and then they collapse. And then great, times of artistic creativity, mathematics, engineering, etc., and then they collapse. And you have to wonder why it collapses. Well, it's the ability for the planet to feed itself. And if we look at some of these drops in temperatures, and I'll take you over to the furthest one, they call it the 8.2K event, where you can see it's literally straight off a cliff there, where global temperatures dropped at least 2.5 degrees Celsius on average. Now that's an average, so there's going to be other places that were 7 degrees Celsius, like 15 Fahrenheit. This kind of drop in temperature your agriculture would be, knocked out at the knees. There's no way that you'd be able to plant and harvest or have any recollection or ability to control that. And we come back, and then suddenly, just as far down as it went, it rose right back up, 3.5 to 4 degrees Celsius, right back to that peak again. And then another subsequent drop off approximately 6,800 years ago. Now, see, those are lost chapters of history. We really don't even know what's going on then, except maybe the Sumerians, the Chaldeans in the Black Sea area. But beyond that, go back to, tell me top 5 civilizations that were around at the years 6,500 BC or 6,500 years before present, excuse me. You can't, it's difficult at best. And if it is, they put you a hunter-gatherer or something, they try to make it out as if there was 0 people living on the planet except for 2 dudes huddled in a cave somewhere scratching on the, it's kind of ridiculous how history has been disappeared. But then, when we come into the Minoan warming period, that was a vast area of expansion in terms of art, agriculture, and that's the big thing. The agriculture expanded at that point. Trade expanded as well across the planet. Because we're only talking about 3,200 years ago. We're definitely into the quote-unquote Egyptian building era. And then we get a knockout in temperatures again and a collapse, and everything drops, 1.5 degrees Celsius on average, possible 2. The Roman warming period was warmer than today. And then we get 2 dropouts from there, and it causes the collapse of the Roman Empire. I mean, that's a big dog there in the room. Wipe them out, collapse them, hyperinflation on the money, the same things we're seeing today. We're just literally repeating almost the Roman warming period, subsequent fall off in temperature and agricultural disturbance, along with the economic economy that got disrupted at the same time. Jerome Powell and the Fed raised rates for the 11th time in July. The Hill warned it's a mistake that could spark a recession. Economists believe this is the last rate hike in the most aggressive rate hike cycle in history. Rate hikes are typically headwinds for gold. Meanwhile, gold has gone up over 20% since 2022. Imagine where gold and silver are going to go when the Fed stops raising and starts cutting. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has the No Fee for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020. And now on with the video. And then the medieval warming period, a lot of people know about that. Vikings going out, setting up Greenland and different habitation along Greenland. They call it green land because as far as you could see, it was green fields. Today it's ice. So even just that simple fact, this chart will be considered misinformation moving forward from the fact checkers because, again, if a user can prove it's inaccurate, and what is inaccurate today with the IPCC coming out with their COP, whatever, meetings, I've even forgot the number. I just don't even care anymore about it. It's such a laughable narrative push. Every single one, they all fly in on their private jets and tell you to do this, that, the other. But since the United Nations and the IPCC deemed it as fact that we are CO2 warming, now those organizations in turn themselves, and you think about those organizations like the UN itself writing in and go, oh, that's a misinformation chart there. They now with this fact checker tool through Google can do that. And then anywhere that chart is won't be visible, findable in the Google images or findable in the Google reference, like when you go and you just find the website with all the listings there. They can remove it completely from the search. That's what I'm saying. They're not going to debate this chart because they're going to lose the debate every single time. There's no way you can stand up against this GISP2 ice core data set and come out and say CO2 is solely responsible for all the warming we're seeing right now. It's never done this before. It's the highest in history. You got all the talking points. But if you can make this chart completely disappear from findability, then that's what they're going to do. And if I could come to next one here too, further down in the article, I'll read the paragraph here. Users only have to provide evidence that can reasonably require them to find, meaning basically just using a search engine or any kind of search results to find that information and then flag it as inaccurate. And then Google will do the rest and then make sure that picture is not findable or the websites that are hosting that picture are not findable in any of their search engines or results. And since DuckDuckGo mirrors a lot of that stuff, then it will also disappear from there too. So talking about a grand solar minimum, which is the primary data research that I do, is following these cycles about every 400 years that cause collapse of civilizations. And what is that trigger? What is that single thing that makes the apex of a civilization at that point collapse? And I boiled it down to one simple thing. It's the ability for that civilization to grow food to feed its populace. And once that stops or gets interrupted, everything else is interrupted as well. That's why the economy fluctuates, why governments change the way they rule people, why there's mass migration. The single cause of it is the production or lack thereof of food. So we're coming into another grand solar minimum. Now, if they can find this in some other, I wouldn't even say NASA, because here's the thing where it's going to get really interesting. NASA and the European Space Agency also show solar cycle 26 and 27 down at nearly 0 sunspots for those 2 full solar cycles. Some years they have like 15 sunspots. But the narrative-driven UN climate change people are going to fact check that and go, no, there's no such thing as a grand solar minimum. But then we're going to run into 2 direct space agencies that are saying it is. So where does the fact check come in here, and which removal of information will rule the day, literally? So I put in grand solar minimum. Incorrect, because I remember reading this article out of the Sun, and somebody was saying, hey, we're coming back into another one of these longer cycles, because it was based on Piers Corbin's research out of the UK. So they flagged this article as false, although Piers Corbin is an accredited astrophysicist. And they're still saying, oh, well, your projections are wrong, even though you're an astrophysicist, and we're just a simple reporter sitting back there looking at Google for information that we never really double check. We're going to say you, the astrophysicist, are incorrect because the IPCC said it's CO2 driven, not your sun junk, dude. So grand solar minimum labeled false. Okay. I'll bring you back. If you thought that other chart was way too long, let's just go back to ancient Egypt. And then we'll go to Rome again and we'll look at the collapse. It's just so easy to pick it out. Drops in temperature mean the end of that era of the superpower of the time. The Egyptians, what happened to them? Oh, they just kind of, in history, they just kind of faded into the dust. What caused them to fade into the dust? The immersion of dust because the climate shifted and they couldn't grow food. What happened to the collapse of the Romans? Why did the Greeks collapse? They just didn't want to be the powers of the world anymore, and they decided Roman era, we're just done with that. We've been superpowers for too long. Just let that go. We'll let somebody else have a go at it. We'll give them a try to be a superpower too and rule the planet. It happens again and again in history, and then we got this different periods here. So here's your forecast, by the way. That drop off coming out from this solar cycle takes us into a grand solar minimum. And for them to fact check and say it's incorrect, then this chart may as well disappear as well. So anybody on the climate narrative side could flag this particular chart here of just 400 years of sunspot observations based on a forecast going into the future from NASA and the European Space Agency both. That's the red line going there. That's two space agencies saying we're going to drop off a cliff on the solar activity. And by the way, it's probably going to affect crop production. And you see why the world's getting turned upside down right now. We're in that exact same timeline year for year. And the agricultural disruption is now affecting our society. And they want to control what you can say about it or the cause and effect. Because you're going to be angry when you realize they knew this 20 years ago. You could have gotten ready, but they left you unprepared. And me too. But anyway, again, this is where it's going to butt heads because we're just talking simple sunspot number and the ESA and NASA coming up and filling in the rest of the red there. They're going to try to memory hole this chart too. And another thing, a lot of people, including myself, doing more information study about South Africa, all the way up to the Sahel, and the really is more the central, because South Africa is the grain basket that exports the most grain into Africa. South Africa is the breadbasket for the rest of countries in Africa that cannot grow their own food. So I'm saying, there's way more to this coups across the Sahel story than meets the eye. If you were to set it up as a new grain growing area on the planet, and you might laugh and go, that's impossible, it's so dry there. Well, they could tap the underground water resources like Gaddafi did and set out massive amounts of hundreds of thousands of acres of crops in the deserts. Because rare earth minerals, a big whoop. You need food to even have a society that will even want the rare earth minerals to manufacture. Like daisy chain that back. Rare earth minerals are pretty much useless if you don't have food. Oil would be another no-brainer. Like, who's going to even be wanting anything in terms of mechanization if you're starving to death, unless you have a machine to help you grow food? So, you really need to roll it back to just the very bare bones, super simplistic, what is the main number one thing that drives everything else? The ability to grow food or not. So if you could turn the Sahel in Northern Africa into the largest grain growing area on the planet, now that's something that's valuable. And fact checkers would say that's impossible. This is false information. Don't even talk about it. So they'll make these charts disappear so you can't even have the conversation. That's the whole thing. It's even conjecture, proven or non-proven. It hasn't played out yet. So nobody knows if it's true or not. But because these fact checker toolbox kits from Google now allow large news organizations and international, like I say, bodies to then flag everything, they can, if there was a concerted effort as much as it is to get all these NGOs organized for a movement of peoples, they could just have teams of people flagging everything every day. And since it's coming from the United Nations, it's coming from this branch, it's coming from that branch, it's coming from this news organization, it's coming from that news organization, they could easily wipe the net of all this possibles for the future to be even talked about. Because this is called the West African Monsoon. And everything I present here, this is peer-reviewed research. I just pulled these out of reports that I found over the years. The West African Monsoon is actually shifting into a wetter pattern that is now discernible over the deserts of Africa, at least along the west coast there coming in. And you can see where the monsoonal flow is. That area in the Sahel is getting wetter. So they should be able to grow more food naturally year by year just from the above groundwater rainfall increasing. And then if you were to couple that with the underground water resources in those different aquifers, Nubian sandstone or the Sousse aquifer up near Morocco, that entire area could be one of the most bountiful food producing areas on the planet. But because it's in such disarray and kept that way on purpose, which makes me sad, to see all those people living in misery like that on purpose. Like, what human being does that to other humans? That's a non-human entity at that point, in my opinion. Because you don't have any empathy to put people into like a disease-ridden state for centuries, and you have no remorse for that. Like, just it's sickening and nauseating is what it is. But once you know that this is the monsoon flow that's going to increase on the right side there, this is what the expectation is moving forward. That blue area will increase with natural rainfall, which will increase crop production. Bring it another level deeper, take the underground water resources, and you have a full industry that can be set up across Africa. The amount of money they could make on this alone would be staggering in comparison to just rare earth minerals. Now, who's going to control the food? Because as we look at 40 degrees north latitude and above going offline or having difficulty, struggling at best to produce good yields, we're going to have to find a different place to grow it to make it up. And who controls the food controls the planet. Again, to bring it back down into the one resource, if I was going to control a world, the one resource, I only need one resource to control, and I can control the entire planet. It's food. It's not energy. It's not gold. It's not this, that, or the other. It's food, and a very close second would be the water to be able to grow the food. If you can control the food, you control civilization. It's really that simple. So who wants to control this growing area is another point of contention to be talked about. But with fact checkers everywhere, are we going to be able to talk about it? I'm not sure. So this type of information, you should probably screen grab every one of these because they might very well disappear from the net in the next year or so. The closer we roll up into this 2024 date with this magnetic anomaly, it's hard to describe what it'll be. The four gas giants line up and they create some sort of second magnetic field, and the Earth passes through the sun's magnetic field and this second magnetic field. And as we loop through that on our regular orbit, they're expecting cracks. So another thing, I would have you look in the news headlines for fissures and earth cracks. This is going to be a big telltale sign that we're getting close to the magnetic, action on the top 2 miles of the crust. The information is going to be tightly controlled as we move through these next 2 years of these earth changes. They're natural, they're cyclical, they're mappable on that same cycle, and you can pretty much see when society is going to have the most difficulty growing food, which is from now through 2025. And actually some of the earlier models that I looked at with Valentina Zarkova, here's what she said. The disruption will occur heavily until 2028. Now you have to realize this is like 2018, 2017, and she was calling on governments back then, 2017, let's say, to stockpile food for the famines that were inbound in 2028 based on solar activity and the movement of cloud cells and jet streams to disrupt food production globally to the level that we'd have a global famine, that she was calling on governments to stockpile food for the year 2028. And then suddenly this control net just swoops in super heavy right now when we're starting to get into the depths of the beginning of the cycle where it's visible for everybody to see. There's nobody in the world that can't not see it now. It's everywhere. And, being a planner, I would think if I knew in the future everybody in the world was going to see this event play out, I'd have to create an excuse for it. Like, scratch the head, global body of, group of 300 or whatever, scratching their head. Everybody's going to see it and they're going to notice something's different. The weather's changing, climatic patterns. We need to give them an excuse so they don't really get scared. Wonder what that would be. Oh, global warming. See, they set that thing in advance 30 years ago, knowing that these changes were going to hit right about now, that there would already be an excuse built in, and that it would also give them more control also. And I include central banks in that, along with United Nations and many of these other bodies that are out there. You're starting to see it. Everybody's seeing it. There's nowhere to go away from it. And I love how Time Magazine, what are the chances that they pull out the Sahel area and actually have you focus on it? Any possibility of that? Like, where is this sitting now? So this is in 2020, and this was when it was first discussed about turning the Sahel into a new agricultural zone. Interesting. And the hollow earth, by the way, there. Now, I'm not going to go too woo-woo on that, but, you know, in our Earth's crust, there's 2 times more water than on all the oceans and lakes and rivers combined on the surface of our planet. So this is also an interesting reference to there's some space in between the lower, layers within the mantle and that sort of thing going down. So they're referencing also space within the crust, caves, and that's what they call, I've heard it termed hollow earth, where there's a huge amount of empty space under the crust in addition to the water that's mixed in, but there's a huge amount of caverns, a lot of them. There's one right close to here called Ruby Falls. It goes several hundred miles, and it might even connect up with the one that's up in Kentucky. But the U.S. military used it as a storage area because there was so much underground water, and it was a great place to protect a huge amount of supplies against foreign invasion here in East Tennessee, of all places. Now, to come in with the, now food's going to be affected, and I know we're just in the last couple of minutes here. Thanks for spending your valuable time. This article talking about how much planting seed is available for the United States to get in for planting. So normally they would have about 800,000 bushels of seed wheat available. Well, right now they're looking at about 183,000 bushels. More than 4 times less than normal. So this in itself, this is a huge one here. Like, how do we plant next year if we have 4 times less seed? And this is all predicated and brought on by the same shifting jet streams and cloud cells from the solar activity that the fact checkers deemed false. So we're actually seeing it in real time unfold here. The seed supply for our planet is being affected. So how do we plant? Because all that stuff's GMO. It won't reseed the next year. You have to buy the seed. That's the whole trap. You know, that farmers might grow millions of tons, but those millions of tons are useless because you can't use them to plant the next year. You can use the seed that's free from that turned off gene in the GMO. These will sprout and grow again, but they're selling it to you every single year. You can't get your own seed and just save it and replant it, which put us in Pandora's nasty box going the opposite direction. We're getting re-encapsulated in the boxes by having our ability to grow food cut off. And here we go. Corn, good to excellent. Dark blue line is where we are this year. We're low. Spring wheat, good to excellent. Blue line is well below the multi-year averages. And again, this is soybean, good to excellent condition, dark blue line. We're starting to come back up with the moisture. So everywhere you look, including the cutoff of the Ukrainian grains, they got all kind of problems over in China now with those massive floods they just had. Northern China is too cold up there. They're having disruptions. Our wheat and corn's not doing good. So everywhere you look, we're starting to see it. And they're going to try to erase the information with this fact checker tool so they can continue to push that it's global warming and has nothing to do with natural cycles. And here I'll leave you with this one. Net price changes since 2021. If you can believe that your electricity's only gone up 20% or your gasoline's only gone up 35%, you have to question some of these numbers coming out of the official figures as well. Maybe I need to fact check the official figures using the same. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. David Dubine signing off. Brighteon TV.